This is Glenda Wharton. This is an oral interview for U.S. History class for Professor Johnson. I'm interviewing M. Carpenter. Ms. Carpenter, what is your full name? Why did your parents select this name for you? Did you have a nickname?
My full name is Molly Donnell Carpenter. I was named after two aunts. My aunt Molly was not a blood relative, but she was married to my grandfather's twin brother, Uncle Bill, and was admired by all the young women in the family. So my mom named me after her. And then my dad has a sister named Donnell that I was named my middle name after. And Carpenter is my family name.
Okay. When and where were you born?
In Hugo, Oklahoma, 1964.
How did your family come to live there?
My mother's parents and grandparents and many generations of my mom's family live there or thereabouts in little surrounding communities. And my dad's family, the Carpenters, always lived here, like for more generations than I know back. So my parents met picking cotton, which was the thing in the 50s and 60s.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
The world was all around the cotton. All in England was about using cotton, and all in this country was about producing the cotton and sending it to England to be used by the world.
Were there other family members in the area, and if so, who?
As I said, my dad's family all lived where I've grown up, which is in northeast Texas, and still do. And my mom's family still live in southeast Oklahoma.
Okay. What was the house or apartment or farm, whatever they lived in, like? How many rooms, how many bathrooms did it have, etc.?
When my mom and dad's family was fairly small, because there wound up being five children, but when it was just the two or maybe three of us, we had an apartment with 2 bedrooms and 1 bath, and lived in Dallas some, but that was pretty much the way we motored. And by the time there were 5 children, we had to have larger homes with 3 to 4 bedrooms.
For the most part, you had electricity, telephone, etc.
Always had power. We had a lot of problems with water in one rent home. We had always pipes breaking, and we wound up replacing the pipes, my dad and I, when I was a teenager.
Were there any special items in the house that you remember?
The house that we lived the longest in was a 2-story. It had enough bedrooms for everybody, and those were good times. It seemed like we lived there for more years than any other place, and everybody came into their own as far as growing up enough to look outside the house and to come back home to what home actually was. So that was a good place for us as kids.
But were there any special items? Anything that stands out?
We had a piano for a while. That was nice. And there was a little room under the stairs that was dark and quiet, which in a house of 6-7 people, 5 of us with my parents, that was nice to get in that little room, that little dark, isolated room.
Okay. What is your earliest childhood memory?
Living in an apartment in Dallas, and we had this, it must have been a duplex, we had this sweet little next door neighbor who was older than my mom, and her son was a teenager, and we're like 2 and 3. But I remember Miss Giesler like it was yesterday. She was always sweet and always pleasant, and never minded the three of us younger kids just screaming and singing and all that.
Okay. Can you describe the personalities of your family members?
Hard working in a nutshell. Everybody was hard working because, if it wasn't hard working trying to corral kids, keep them clean, and teach them things, then it was, the ones that were out in the world working. My dad, a lot of his sisters, and he, and his brothers, and my grandmother was always worked outside the home. So hard working people.
What kind of games did you play growing up?
When my siblings were old enough, we played board games, card games, dice games, hopscotch, anything at all we could do. Tricks on the swing out in the oak tree, just whatever you could make up.
Well, what was your favorite toy and why, if you can elaborate?
I liked cards and Chinese checkers. My sister and the one sister that I feel closest to is a year younger than me, and we were each other's match as far as being able to try each other most challenging. We could tell halfway into a Chinese checker game how many moves each other needed to win one move ahead of the other. We were very competitive, and we could tell even early on who was going to win.
Okay, you described these things that you did for fun or whatnot, but what was your favorite thing to do for fun? Whether it was movies,
it was
music.
music. I had a plastic record player, and my sister, I believe I got that for Christmas, and my sister got an album. And so between the two of us, it was, we shared that together. And then when I was just a little older, by the time I was 13, I could babysit and make some money, and I would go to garage sales with my aunts, my dad's sisters, and I started collecting Beatles albums and Rolling Stones albums and old Southern rock, Bo Diddley albums, and I played the music for the house. If I wasn't in the middle of playing records, then my mom would turn the radio.
And if I'm not mistaken, at one point you were like, 17, I think, when you were in the newspaper, Paris News, for
my Beatles collection and how much I still admire them. Although I'm like a generation after.
You still have that collection?
I do.
Most of it, or pretty much everything?
All of it.
That's fantastic. Okay. Did you have family chores? If so, what were they, and which was your least favorite?
Well, I can't say I had a least favorite. We all took turns doing dishes, and including my brother. And there were very few chores like mowing the yard with a push mower or cleaning the oven that my mom insisted were paying jobs. And so we would vie for who got to do that, because neither one of them were something somebody wanted to do, but if you wanted money, you were going to do those jobs. And so sometimes it was a matter of taking turns doing it, because all of my older sisters wanted to do it. But you could even use some of your lawn mowing money to pay somebody to do your turn at the dishes. We bargained between each other. So, but I always had spending money, because I saw to it, if not babysitting, then doing those extra chores that were paying jobs.
It's very ironic that you mentioned chores that pay. This next question I'd like to ask that Do you receive, or did you receive, any allowance?
No.
If so, how much?
Never.
Did you save your money or spend it?
I saved it until it was the right time to spend. I always had goals, and I met those goals.
Well, what was school like for you as a child? And also, what were your best and worst subjects? And also, where did you attend grade school, high school, or college?
I went to a grade school at Shakota. One year, we lived in Cavanis for a year, and I went to Central Elementary.
When you say Shakota, you mean Shakota Independent School District at the time?
Yes, and it had, while I was like 5th grade, I believe, it went into only elementary school, but up till 5th grade finished, there was a high school there, and every year the graduating class was smaller, and it just got where there wasn't enough high school graduates to afford to keep it open, and North Lamar and all of the smaller districts in North Lamar now, school district, were all combining and sending high school students and junior high eventually up to the North Lamar campus. So we started busing when I was in junior high.
What school activities and or sports did you participate in?
The only thing you could do in grade school was basketball as far as organized. We did some gym productions of just physical fitness. There was a lot of tumbling, a lot of different types of rope jumping and running laps, and just I remember that clearly even at Central. But primarily at Shakota was basketball, and the days of when the high school was there, Shakota really was good at basketball and went to state and won state. And that's saying something for a little bitty community.
I'd say.
It was a matter of pride.
Do you remember any fads from your youth? Popular hairstyles, clothes?
Bell bottoms. Awesome. Doesn't get much better than that. Hip huggers and bell bottoms.
In a nutshell, huh? Okay. Well, who were your childhood heroes, if any?
Well, as a young grade school student, Richard Drake could play some basketball.
Richard Drake being a community member.
He's a well-known community member now, but
his own construction
remembering
company.
Watching him play in high school basketball is something I'm quite proud of, because he was always handsome, and man, he could play ball. And being that basketball was everything in our community, he was a star.
I'm sure Mr. Drake would be happy to know that.
I've talked to him about that since then.
What were your favorite songs and music?
Mostly everything. My mom was always keen on keeping music playing, whether it was later my record player or her radio. We always had music playing. In the car, there was always a radio. And it tended to be pop. My dad's family listened to country, so I would hear plenty of that too. But my mom was always into the pop and rock.
Did you have any pets? If so, what kind and what were their names?
We had a family dog that lived several long years with us, named Lady. She was a German Shepherd that had somehow gotten in a trailer of a truck, 18-wheeler truck that my uncle was driving back and forth between here and Oregon. And when he opened the trailer after getting back to Oklahoma to deliver whatever he was hauling, that dog jumped off and was fine, and he brought her to my mom, and that was, an instant love, and she lived many years with us and was a big part of our family, named Lady. And then we always had, different cats here and there. I had a parakeet. My dad brought me home when I was about 12 for a birthday present. Who knew? This was very unusual. Had a shoebox, and he didn't bring us presents. My mom always was the presenter for the family, but yeah, brought me home this box and said, "Your birthday present's in there. Stick your hand in there." And it was very strange. My mom did not expect it, but I stuck my hand in there, and this parakeet bit me.
How old were you?
I was about 12, maybe 13. So it really shocked me. But that a parakeet, I named Turner. And the way he turned his head around and looked at you, and everybody loved him. He lived a ripe old age.
Okay. What historic world events had the most impact on you while you were growing up? And also, did any of them personally affect your family?
My mom was pregnant with me when John Kennedy was shot. And she still will say that. Because that was so affecting of the way the world became such a serious place for a young family having children, and neither one of my parents ever stopped talking about that, and how the trust in mankind was affected. And then I remember seeing the Beatles on the first television we ever had, the night that Dick Cavett had them play Hey Jude. They hadn't been on television.
So you think it was pivotal,
it was
like
pivotal.
a safety issue personally? Like, you used to be able to leave your door unlocked, that kind of thing.
No, we always felt comfortable with that, as far as the president's murder. But probably more bringing it into our home was the happiness of music. And it was just a big deal. We all gathered around and watched that Beatles show. And, my dad was not big on Beatles, but my mom had been. We had listened to them already for a while on the radio, but she knew that they were going to play that night. So we were all ready for the show, and watched them present Hey Jude to the world. And I'll never forget that, because the whole family watched it. And although I had heard of the Beatles, I'd never seen a picture of them. I had no idea what they looked like. And they seemed fresh and mysterious, and a link out to the rest of the world. It opened my horizons personally.
Okay. Well, how is the world today different from what it was like when you were a child?
It's more connected as far as communications, and the thought of, well, I'll tell you, those were back in the days when, salesmen used to come around trying to sell you encyclopedias like they were up to date. They were never kept up to date. Even the newest ones weren't up to date, because we all know things change constantly, especially in science and medicine. So we bought a used pair or a used set of encyclopedias at one point, and that was better than nothing. But back in those days, you did not have, unless you had a decent library you could go to, there was not internet. So you might eventually read about something that you were curious about, but that information was not readily available to research and find out all the history of say, a certain machine piece, or it was all hearsay or what someone else had learned, or I talked to this guy who knew this. And so in that way, we've very much improved.
You've used the phrase "in those days." Can you give me an age
That's been
range?
about 45 years ago.
How old were you?
I was about 4 and 5,
Okay.
preschool, grade school age.
Well, what is the one thing you most want people to remember about you?
That I love music. I was a good student. I used to be pretty smart. And family oriented.
All right. What was your... Well, you don't have to answer this question because constitutionally you don't have to answer this question. But what was your religion growing up? If you don't want to answer that, you don't have to.
The biggest thing when I think back at childhood was that my mom was not one to, and she apparently got this from her mother. She was not one to necessarily go to one church. We would, on a Sunday morning, she would ask us, "What kind of music do y'all want to hear today?"
But it was the same denomination. If it was a... Oh, she was...
She would ask you, as a group of little girls, what kind of music do y'all want to hear today? And we sort of voted on that about where we wanted to go to church. It might be Pentecost, it might be Methodist, it might be Baptist, it might be, as in Southern Baptist, it might be Independent Baptist. I never have to this day gone to a Catholic church, but there wasn't one close to where we lived. Otherwise, I'm sure my mom would have taken us. As a child, she was taken sometimes to the Catholic church. So just being aware of that day being set aside for religious events was always recognized. Years later, she was a member of the Southern Baptist, and I'm a Southern Baptist after learning different things about different denominations.
I initiated your comment earlier about being mentioned in the Paris newspaper concerning collecting Beatles memorabilia. But is there any other time in your life that you were mentioned in the any newspaper?
Oh, I'm sure there are. I've worked at the same job for 30 years. I'm sure there's been a mention here and there of my name. It's not a big community.
And could you tell me again the year that you were mentioned about the Beatles collection, or maybe your age?
That might have been, let's see, might have been 78, somewhere along in there.
Okay.
But it was like Beatlemania was a new thing to me. And I was very talkative about it in those days. And I really don't know. One of my dad's sisters, actually, who I would go and buy these albums, I would go with her to Dallas and buy these albums of the Beatles to listen to from these garage sales. She knew what a fan I was, and worked with a man or worked with his wife or something that had access to writing a column in the paper. So that's how that came about. Just a subject for...
So it's quite apparent that you are and always will be a Beatles fan. I have
three more
questions for you. Who were your friends when you were growing up?
I had really good, even preschool. Renata, who's a teacher now, a special ed teacher, as well as higher level education. I mean, she's educated in school administration. I'm quite proud of her. And we studied together played together before either one of us went to kindergarten, and went to school together all through, except for the year that I lived in Cavanis. But we graduated high school together and have always been very close. Although after school, our different careers have taken us in different cities and away from each other, but we're always in contact.
Okay. Describe a typical family dinner. Did you all eat together as a family?
We did.
Who did the cooking? What were your favorite foods, etc.?
When I was very young, my mom always did the cooking, and country food, whatever came out of the garden, squash and okra, that kind of thing was big. Whatever fish was freshly caught, we would have fish. And, at one point as a teenager, my dad was raising hogs, so we ate a lot of pork. We had enough we could sell some. But gardening and eating garden food was always a big thing. We canned and had fresh produce all the time, if not canned.
Oh, one last and final question. How were holidays, like birthdays, Christmas, etc., celebrated in your family? And also, did your family have special traditions?
At Christmas, it was just always understood that we would gather usually on Christmas Eve, because Christmas Day you could go see the grandparents or whatever when we were young kids. And then older, it was better as my siblings began having children. It was better that my mom and dad's family got to, immediate family got together at their house still on Christmas Eve. That's the way we started when I was still in grade school, started celebrating Christmas. Not maybe grade school. Yeah, grade school, it was Christmas morning. So by the time the three oldest of us was in high school, Christmas was on Christmas Eve, and then certainly by the time we started getting jobs, being after hours Christmas Eve, it just always has worked out better as far as people being able to get together, and leaves Christmas Day completely open to whoever's going where, to other arrangements.
Very well. Thank you, Miss Carpenter, for your time. And this is Linda Wharton, end of oral interview for Professor Johnson's U.S. History class. Today's date is October the 23rd, 2013.